Hey, I'm Adam Tracy. So I got a lot of feedback on my previous video about 3 jurisdictions in which to form your crypto company or your ICO company. And all 3 of those were offshore, which admittedly isn't for everybody. And, there's decidedly some advantages to doing it. But the question becomes, and I get this all the time, and I've gotten this forever, even in the securities world, I have to incorporate in the United States, or I don't want to deal with an offshore jurisdiction, which is then hard to deal with. What do I do? Like, where do I incorporate it within the 50 states, right? And so your 4 biggest states are Delaware, Nevada, Florida, Wyoming, okay? And the reality is Delaware has historically been the place to incorporate. Reason being that hundreds of years ago, that's where everything just sort of started. Not a very good reason, but the reality is that there's a wealth of case law, okay, that is underneath the Delaware Corporations Code. So any possible scenario that you could possibly think of as it relates to a corporation, shareholder disputes, suits between companies, is probably been accounted for in Delaware, and that's great, and it's for a long time been sort of the stalwart. Now, at some point in the last 20 years, Nevada sort of came onto the scene, and what they did in a large part was emulate what the Delaware Code was and then incorporate parts of the Delaware common law to sort of codify it as a statute. And so you've got this sort of competing business between what are 2 relatively small states, right? And that's what it is. It's a business, right? They're looking for the compensation that they earn from incorporating in Delaware versus Nevada and vice versa. And the reality is none of them are really cheap as it relates to the whole, right? The initial fee for Nevada may be $175, but you have an $800 initial list due before the end of the first year. Same with Delaware. You can run up to $1,100 on a simple incorporation. So it's relatively high. Now the alternatives are, the main alternatives at least are Florida and Wyoming. Florida has always had a pretty decent corporations code. A lot of it's incorporated from Delaware. Works pretty well. It's got a good online system. It's got a good quick turnaround, which beats Wyoming, which Wyoming went the whole low cost way. Wyoming is by far the lowest cost place to incorporate for what you get, and it's got some decent features in terms of privacy, which Nevada was known for in respect with converse to Delaware. But the reality is, between all of them, for the large part, it doesn't matter. It's overstated, and it's a bit of marketing, right? So you're going to get involved in it, and I'm in Chicago. I work in California as well. It's all equal. It's all the same, right? I mean, you at the end of the day, most of the corporations' codes are based off the model corporations code, and the reality is that the benefits that you receive from one state to another are relatively minimal. I mean, if you go to a state like Michigan or Mississippi, it takes $50 to incorporate a company. Illinois is $500. Why would you ever pay that? Because you don't get any real benefit other than the fact that you don't have to pay for a registered agent if you're inside the state of Illinois. So, when you get into sort of the codex of corporation law within the United States, it's relatively the same. You have some advanced protection in places like Delaware and Nevada because the law is a little more advanced, only because the majority of the incorporations have occurred in Delaware and then to a lesser extent Nevada. But you don't get a great advantage of incorporating in Nevada versus incorporating in California or incorporating in Texas. Obviously, there's state taxes to consider. When you look at Florida and Nevada, there's no state taxes, but if you don't live in those states, you're not going to avail yourself of those tax protections. And you also have to consider the fact that if you want to incorporate in a state like Nevada, but you're operating from Illinois, in order to technically operate in Illinois and avail yourself of the corporate shield, the protection of being a corporation, you're going to have to do a foreign incorporation in Illinois. So whatever amount of money that you may save by, or perceive to save by filing in one state, if you operate in another state, best practices would suggest that you do a foreign incorporation so you could legally operate in that state, and that foreign incorporation is typically the same cost of just creating a new corporation. So, no matter where you are at the end of the day, unless it is a very advanced, hyper complex, like VC-backed company, whether you're in Delaware, Nevada, Florida, Wyoming, it ultimately doesn't come down to much. And the reality is that every corporation's code, no matter what state you in, says to the extent that your bylaws, right, the bylaws that control the corporation, don't provide for something different, this is the law. So literally in every state, even the most arcane states, like a place like Illinois, where inconceivably they charge $500 for an LLC. Why would you ever pay that, right? Indiana is $70, Michigan is $50, and Wisconsin is $90. Why would I pay $500 for the state of Illinois? Well, I don't know, and I don't. But the reality is, if I wanted to create an LLC or a corporation in Illinois that had the same rights and privileges and afforded the same rights and privileges to its shareholders, officers, directors, etc., in terms of liquidation rights, voting rights, indemnification, you name it, I can incorporate that into my bylaws, right? So, or my operating agreement if it's an LLC. So the whole concept and the whole advantage, quote unquote, of incorporating in one of these other states really starts to come down to very nil, because at the end of the day, you can contract that. You can contract away with that in terms of your operating agreement or your bylaws. So, it's overstated. It is a bit overstated. When I look at it, I look at ease of incorporation. Like Nevada is great. Nevada has this great online system. You can find a registered agent in Nevada for $30. It's great. You can get very quick turnaround. Illinois, very slow, right? Delaware, okay. Florida, very fast. So, at the end of the day, you have to account for the fact that, one, you have to find a registered agent if you're going to go in the state outside of the state that you live in, and you have to pay for the foreign incorporation where you are, right? So that's going to be another cost. And you also have to think about just the general efficacy of the whole thing, because it's really overstated, and it's a bit of a marketing concept for states like Nevada and Wyoming, which conceivably have very minimal tax bases. I mean, they really do. They don't have a lot going on. So, they've tried to make it a revenue source. Delaware has long done that. Delaware is also one of the smallest states. So, the question of, I can't do this state or the other state, and long and the short, it's a lot of schadenfreude about very little, because you can make the same thing happen in whatever state you need to make it happen. You just have to go into the incorporation knowing what sort of structure you want and how your operating agreement or your bylaws need to read to make that structure. And at the end of the day, if you were incorporated in, call it Mississippi, and you had VC-backed private equity, you were going down that route, for you to take your corporation in any other state and reincorporate it into one of the more common states like a Delaware, Nevada, or even Wyoming, all you're doing is doing a redomicile, which is just the cost of starting a new corporation. So at the end of the day, if you're faced with a potential $1 million investment or whatever the case may be, but a lot of it depends, which inexplicably would be the case, but if it depended upon, in some part, upon going to one of these more common states where there's more established law on a more sort of reconcilable way, you'd simply be able to redomicile for the cost of a new corporation, which is hundreds of dollars, if not $1,000 at most. So, at the end of the day, for a startup, start where you are, get your bylaws or your operating agreement if you're an LLC, and the means with which you want it, and in a means which is cogent with how, real investment, VC, private equity, whatever the case may be, how those are linked up, and go down that route, right? Save yourself the money, because you don't get this huge advantage of going to some crazy state. You don't get a big advantage of going to Delaware, and Delaware's online is terrible. You have to pay to access it. It's crazy. Why would you want to do that? It's dumb. People can't research you without paying money. It doesn't make any sense. It's an annoyance because they only charge you like $5. Why would you do it? It's stupid. So start where you are, right? Get your corporate house in order in terms of your minutes, your bylaws, your initial meetings, everything, which is a very simple thing to do. Most attorneys should be able to do it. And then if need be, when you get to the certain size or you start attracting a certain level of investment, then move. Then move if it's necessary. Move to a Nevada, move to a Delaware, move wherever you want. But that move only costs the cost of incorporating. So if it's going to justify an investment of any significant amount of money, you're going to do it because it's a small price to pay. So to add an addendum to my previous email about, hey, where do we incorporate? If you're going to incorporate in the States and you're a startup, wherever you are, it's fine. A good attorney can tailor your documents to meet the needs of any real investor or any significant investor. And if need be, you have to move to another jurisdiction. It's like a 48-hour process, and it's a couple $100. So don't fret about the differences between Delaware, Nevada, Florida, Wyoming, because they're not that great. They're not that great, and you have to think this is a profit center for what are otherwise profit-lacking states, right? And so they sort of trump up their ability to have these wonderful corporations, but they really don't, as a general matter of fact, add much to it. So wanted to add that corollary to my previous video about, where to incorporate. But if you have any questions, email me, tracyfirm.com, at@tracyfirm.com. Talk to you later.